you for reminding me.
Okay. So we are continuing along in Pirkei Avot, first chapter. And the last Mishnah that we looked at was Mishnah Daled, the fourth Mishnah. And the first of two leaders of the rabbinic, so to speak, proto-rabbinic community, Yossi ben Yoezer, is the author of Mishnah Daled, and he gives us again a three-part statement, telling us, encouraging us to be a home where Torah is welcomed, where we are willing to put ourselves at the feet of Torah sages, and there's this contrast. On the one hand, the dust of their feet should be what we should be rolling ourselves in or covering ourselves with their dust, and then thirstily drinking in their words. So we've got the dust on the bottom, and then the water and the drinking from the top. So we should be eagerly willing to learn from the sages. So that's Mishnah Daled, and his partner in leading the community is Yosei ben Yochanan. Yosei is just short for Yosef, for Joseph, and Yosei ben Yochanan is the author of the next Mishnah. So we're on Mishnah 5. And again, somebody who wants to volunteer to read their translation of this Mishnah is invited to do so. Who's going to be there? Okay, thank you. It's the first person who said, I'll read. I think that's Sarita.
Yeah. Okay, so Yosef, the son of Yochanan of Jerusalem, said, "Let thy house be open wide. Let the poor be members of thy household, and engage not in much gossip with women. This applies even to one's own wife, how much more then to the wife of one's neighbor. Hence the sages say, whoso engages in much gossip with women brings evil upon himself, neglects the study of the Torah, and will in the end inherit Gehenna."
There you go.
I just had to read that one.
Right, thank you. Maybe we'll skip that Mishnah and go to the next one. Just kidding. So here we have a teaching that should be, in certain ways, read in tandem with the previous teaching, right? Yossi ben Yoezer talks about who should be in your house. And he says, let your house be a meeting place for the sages. And those are the people that you should be catering to and serving. And now we have Yossi ben Yochanan talking about who should be in your house. And he has a very different take. He has a different emphasis. Before we get to the obvious and problematic part of the end of his statement, we have the first two parts of his three-part statement, I think are easier for us to relate to and to affirm. And how do they line up with what his partner said? What is he emphasizing?
Well, he's emphasizing your house should be open to everybody, not just to the wise or to the sages, but to everybody, to all members of however you define the community. Right.
There seems to be in the way that he responds to his partner, to his colleague, we begin to see a possible elitism in Mishnah Daled, in the fourth Mishnah. Oh, you're supposed to be only looking out for the VIPs, for the scholarly elite, and Rabbi Yossi ben Yochanan says, open your door to everybody. There shouldn't be an entrance requirement. You shouldn't have to take the SATs in order to get into this to your house. So that's the first thing. It's a very open-ended, literally. He says patuach, which means open, lirvacha, wide, right? To make it as easy for people to come in as possible. We have an image in our midrashic traditions of Abraham. We have Abraham pitching his tent in various places, and the rabbis understood that his tent was open on all four sides, so that no matter which direction somebody was coming from, they would be able to enter into his tent and get shelter and shade and be ministered to. So no questions asked. And of course, that's the famous story of Abraham running after those three strangers. He doesn't know that they're angels. He has no idea who they are. He doesn't ask them for ID. He doesn't ask them for any kind of credentials. Back in the old days, remember when we could be oblivious to those kinds of questions? So yes, so Yossi ben Yochanan is definitely speaking to his colleague's idea and saying, wait a second, there's a danger here that a whole bunch of people will be left out if you only do what you're doing. So I just want to say, it's not like either or. It's not like you can only do this or only do that. But certainly there is a human tendency that once there is a kind of an exclusiveness to some kind of a program, then the idea of being inclusive sometimes gets forgotten about. So that's the first of the three pieces. How do we understand the second piece? Right? The second piece, let the poor or let the needy be members of your household. Okay, any ideas there, any suggestions there about what this might mean? How does this speak to us?
I find it quite challenging.
Jen and then Craig.
I find it quite challenging. I mean, does members of the household mean, it's can you let a friend couch surf for a while who needs it? Sure, but once you're talking about like a member of the household, like stay indefinitely, no matter how long you need it. Even for some relatives, I would find that super hard, no matter how financially charged they were. So if it means actually like let them live there for as long as they need to, I find that incredibly difficult.
So, and in fact, some of our family members we wouldn't let to live there for as long as they want.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, if you have a financially challenged friend or family member, to open your house indefinitely to them, I would find incredibly challenging. So okay. I find it a very difficult suggestion.
Right, but to put it, I acknowledge that, and I just want, again, if we put it in juxtaposition to the previous statement, it could be a kind of a corrective statement.
Right. If it just means be welcoming, and help out as much as you can, absolutely. It depends on what you mean by be a member of your household. Right.
Okay. Yeah, Craig.
That was basically my point. It's more inclusivity and more in the sense of social justice. Bring the poor and give them something to eat. Take care of them, which is what we're supposed to do anyway.
Okay. Good. Geraldine.
My translation is the one from the old Siddur Sim Shalom. And it says, open wide the doors of your home and make the poor welcome as members of your household. Is that the translation in the Hebrew? Doesn't say make them members of your house, make them as if they were members.
The Hebrew is V'yu Aniyim b'nei beitecha. And the poor or the needy, at least that's one translation, let them be members of your household.
And this one says as members.
Right. So your translation is feeling a little bit of that question that Jen brought up and that Craig was speaking to also. I mean, does that mean you're supposed to install all these poor people into your house and let them have the run of your house? Or does it mean treat them decently, treat them as you would, love your neighbor as yourself? Right?
So
that's
my
yeah, one second, Siri, one second.
As if they were members of your household.
Right. I think this touches on this difficulty of how far do you go with this? I know somebody, he's the brother of a very good friend of mine. So he's, a very good friend of mine once removed, or something like that. And he has housed homeless people in his house. Guess what? He's still alive and well and successful. I couldn't do it, but he was able to see a way to do that. So he literally took a needy person and made that person a member of his house. Before we get to Sarita, just another. There are other possible ways.
Rabbi?
1 second, please. There are other possible ways to think about that. What about people that adopt needy people? What about foster homes that open their homes to people that need a roof over their head, that need shelter, that need care, that need somebody who's going to reach out to them and touch them literally. So these things, they're not for everybody.
No.
But they should be recognized as something that is of great value. Sarita, thanks for your patience.
I know Nick wanted to talk, but I didn't let him go first, and then I'll go.
Okay, Nick, thanks for your patience.
Yeah, just to go along with your story about your friend, my father used to tell me stories about my grandfather who lived in Smolensk in Russia, and they always had a house full of beggars and people from the street. And my grandfather took it very seriously, and returned these people to the street better than when they came in.
Great. So good. A beautiful family tradition to treasure. Sarita.
So I was interpreting this not that you had to have them permanently live with you, but that if someone is a member of your household, they don't have to ask permission to come; they can just come. And so here, the sages
that's what Rabbi Frost said.
Yeah.
Right. So here, because if that's the case, if someone is asking, can I join you? Can I come listen to the sage and what have you? Of course, as you could say no. But this is saying, no, you can't deny them. You're having the sages come. You're going to be engaging in these conversations and such. And the poor have the right to be there. So that's how I'm getting it, that they really just have the right to come and you don't have the right to turn them away.
All right, good. Thank you. Josie.
Two things come to mind. One is I had a wonderful friend, may she rest in peace, who came from an Irish immigrant family. And she said every couple of months, her father would yell, okay, here comes another one. And some guy would be coming up the sidewalk with his pants tied with a rope, with an old satchel. And whoever he was from the old country, they would put him up. And
very good.
The second thing is now we're in a time when we're afraid to get more than 6 feet away from people we know. Where does this leave the stranger?
Right. Yes, these are tough and very, very challenging times. I want to take away that edge, which we're all really struggling with right now, and go back to like the good old days.
When we could.
And think a little bit also about the different suggestions that have been made and the different reminiscences that people have had. When we think about how comfortable, let's say we get welcomed into a let's say we're not one of the really, the 1%ers. What happens if we are invited in to a home of people who are in a much more fortunate economic, social stratum? How comfortable would we feel? So this is part of the challenge also. What Nick was saying, and I think, Josie, what you were saying too, those times, even though we think about all of the really terrible limitations and failures in society back in the old days, and we've been trying to pat ourselves on the back until very recently, and then of course now we're stopping a little bit about how much progress we've made. One of the things I think where we haven't made progress was that there was a much more integrated, to use that loaded term, integrated society with regard to economic status, so that the poor people and the more well-off people interacted a lot more in many ways. I don't want to become, I don't want to make simplifications and so on. But yes, in the old country, for instance, people were people, and the rich people looked down on the poor people, just like humans are supposed to do. They're human. But nevertheless, for instance, when you had a wedding in town, all the poor people were invited to the wedding. Like that was a communal norm. They had their own chow down table, and it maybe didn't have the finest china there, but they were there. So there was a kind of a compromise, that made it possible to welcome people and yet somehow or other, maintain one's own VIP status or whatever. It's a big problem that this in every way that we've talked about, in so many more ways. How do we make those connections? How do we make those connections in a way that respects people's dignity? Rambam has an interesting reading for this, and it touches on things that I've been thinking about a lot lately. He says, "Let the poor be members of your household." Right? That's the literal translation. Right? That the poor should become members of your household. He says, if you have a choice, you have work that needs to be done in your house. Should you get a slave, or should you hire a poor person to come and do the work? So he says, clearly, you should hire a poor person rather than have a slave be in your house. So you could have actually, if you were Jefferson Davis, you could have read it the opposite way. You could have said, oh yeah, let your house be full of slaves, and they'll be members of your household, and you'll take care of them in a patronizing way. Maimonides says, no, the opposite. Being a member of your household is about not being patronizing at all. It's about treating each other for better or for worse as kin. So what he says is that when you have a chance to give gainful employment to somebody, which preserves their dignity rather than subjugating them, that's what you should do. So that's how he reads this text. And I'm going to say this now because I think that it's something that, again, bothers me a lot. In this time of challenge that we're in. So we are beginning to recognize so many problems that are in our society, in our social lives, in our the way we've organized ourselves. And yes, I'm not minimizing at all the psychological difficulties, the emotional burdens of isolation and of not being able to reach out to a friend, to a loved one, let alone even to a stranger. This is part of what makes it possible to be a human being. We are social animals. I'm not minimizing any of those difficulties, but we have to recognize all of the other stuff that this crisis situation has put in front of us. All of the protests and so on are telling us this didn't happen yesterday when all of a sudden this virus came on the scene. All the virus is doing is making us now actually pay attention to things that have been right under our nose. Income inequality is one of those things. Our essential workers are almost by definition low-paid workers. That's what the word essential now means. And we need to ask ourselves, is that what we want to continue when we go back to normal? Is that what we want to go back to? Do we want to go, oh God, if we could only go back to when we didn't have to even think about the fact that we're oppressing and exploiting all those poor people who take care of us. I hope not. I mean, that would be such a tragedy. And we have a choice. Now, this is, I think, one of the issues that we are being called upon to do tshuva. You know, we're leading up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and with all due respect to everybody, it's not going to be about whether or not we have an extra camera in the shul. The real issue is, as human beings and as a Shomrei community, what kind of efforts are we going to make to actually fix stuff that we took for granted before? Are we going to pay our custodians a living wage? We don't at the moment. Are we going to do that? Does a person who knows how to operate a video camera deserve to be paid more than the person who keeps us safe by wiping down the toilets and the toilet seats and the door handles? So I want that to be thought about in our community. I'm sorry that unfortunately it seems to be something that some people don't want to hear about. There's one more point to make about this phrase one more point that I want to make. There are many points, I'm sure, and that is that there's another reading of this text. The word Aniyim we think of as poor people, the needy. But the word Aniyim can also mean in biblical parlance, and it can sometimes in some of the Mishnah manuscripts that we have, it can be actually spelled differently. It can be spelled Anavim. Anavim means the humble. Those who are poor in spirit, so to speak, right? To use a phrase from another tradition. The Aniyim are not then people that don't have money. They're the people that don't lord it over other people. They're the people that don't see themselves as being better than anybody else, as if they have something that other people don't have. People who are humble and people who are just simply trying to be as human as possible. So that reading takes it out of the economics per se and says, it's great. It's great to have Yossi Ben Yoezer, my good friend, my colleague from Mishnah 4. It's great to say, we had all of the most amazing celebrity intellectuals coming to our house. It was so great. We had Professor so-and-so, and we had Rabbi so-and-so, and we had Dr. so-and-so. And what Yossi Ben Yochanan is saying is, what kind of mention are they? Good. So they've written 83 books. But are they decent human beings? One of the great difficult scandals of modern intellectual discourse is, what do we do with somebody like Martin Heidegger? Heidegger was considered, and is still considered by many people, the greatest 20th century philosopher and one of the greatest philosophers of all time. The man was a Nazi. How is it possible that a person who's a great thinker can be a Nazi? Nobody's been able to figure that out yet. And the answer that a lot of people give is, well, we bifurcate, we compartmentalize. Wagner was a great composer. He was a lousy human being. So fine. Degas was a great painter, one of my favorite painters. He was an anti-Semite. He was a miserable person as a person. So you do that. It becomes, I think, a lot more difficult to make those kinds of distinctions when you're talking about thinking and actually pondering life and reality. This person really understood life, except he happened to hate Jews. What kind of life are you understanding then? What is your thinking? So I think that Heidegger throws into our faces a really difficult question of, what are the criteria for deep, brilliant, astounding, profound thinking without that kind of underpinning of just plain human decency? Is it possible to be brilliant and not be decent? So I leave that question.
It's a very relevant question, though, because that's been a discourse, part of the Me Too movement is, what do you do about people like Picasso, for instance, or people who say, well, they're not going to watch Woody Allen films anymore, or buy his book, and the book shouldn't have been published because of, how they treated women and other people. I mean, they were, miserable human beings. What do you do with them? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, this is a very tough question. Yeah, Jen.
I just think, like, with the Heidegger question, we can actually, for me, it hits closer to home, because the truth is, he probably wasn't really all that anti-Semitic on his own. He went along with the Nazis because it was safe. It was a safe thing to do. It let him keep his great university job. I mean, and I feel like
that's
that.
not. I wish that were the case. I wish that were the case. It's not true. We have what's called the black books, his philosophical journals that he was writing even before the war. He was a Nazi. So
Okay. It's hard to believe, because he had a Jewish teacher that, it's
not only, and he had a Jewish lover, and the Jewish lover loved him despite the fact that he was a Nazi. Hannah Arendt, one of the great critics of authoritarianism and one of the great critics of collaboration, and I mean, don't get me started.
Well, I think, like, it's still, like, the point for me is still that anyone, like, we're in this position where we're all have, like, as you said before, we've all kind of ignored the social problems that we had. I mean, I didn't ever really think seriously about defunding the police before watching somebody be murdered.
Right.
And that made me complicit, because I had no particular reason to think about it, even though all these other things had happened, like, before that.
Right.
So to some extent, like, I find that the harder and more relevant question, because I don't think many of us are, like, hardcore prejudice. We're just privileged and, going along with our privilege. And that's a super difficult thing to overcome.
Right. And that's where Yossi ben Yochanan's social critique, right? Let those poor people be in your house, really touches a nerve on all of those levels, right? Because that brings us up into this whole, when privilege is about being shielded from all the needy and from all of the uncomfortable people and from all of the issues. You don't get stopped on the street, and you get treated nicely in the store. And if we heard Al Pelham, talk, which, by the way, we're getting a follow-up conversation happening. When is it? Tuesday, Wednesday? Sarita, when is it?
Wednesday at 8:00.
Wednesday at 8:00. So that's important for us to keep on going and not make it a one-off. But Al Pelham gave, the simplest example from his own, youth, which is not that far away. You couldn't go to the bank and get a loan here in Montclair. Instead you had to go, get some exorbitant interest, loan from a private loan shark, and continue to dig a deeper and deeper hole for yourself. If you wanted to just do something. And that was happening right under everybody's nose. We didn't care about the redlining. We didn't care about any of this kind of stuff. Why? Because we could get away with it, because it didn't affect me personally, right? Because we were privileged. We had a different socioeconomic position. So we only have a couple of minutes. And
Lynn wanted to say something.
Yes. Who?
Lynn was raising her hand.
Oh, sorry.
Hi.
Yes.
No, it's going to seem like a tangent, but I don't think it is. Going back to the text, members of the household or as members of the household implies a certain sense of responsibility. You mentioned foster children. It implies that not only it's a good thing to do, we are responsible for them. We are, in a way, part of their being and their education, and we have to live up to that. Instead of being privileged, instead of being separated, instead of...
Thank you. Yes, good. So I'm going to actually dispense with the last piece quickly. Wait, no, I'm not. Geraldine. No, you have to unmute.
No, I did. I wish you would say something about the last piece, because that's relevant to the book that we're going to be discussing on Monday with our book group.
Okay, well, now I have no time. No, so just kidding. Okay, I'm going to say something real quick. This is a three-piece statement, as so many of these statements have been. So the three-piece statement is, Ve'al tarbeh sicha im ha'isha, and do not overdo talking with a woman. That's the end of the statement. The rest of it is a later editorial comment. It's unfortunate that Sarita's translation didn't bring that up. But in the Hebrew is Ishto Amru. They said this with regard to, etc., etc., etc. and we can unpack this next time a little bit more. There's just, the truth has to be said. Here's a man with a big open heart, a big open home, with a tremendously profound socioeconomic sensitivity and critique. The guy's a misogynist, right? The man sees women as secondary, as not part of society. He's not part of his audience, right? Because he's taking it for granted. He goes, okay, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you. Be good, be nice, be open, be tolerant, be inclusive, and don't talk to a woman. So obviously, he's not talking to women. He's talking to men, right? Men are the only audience here. Just like when we say, all men are created equal, except if they don't have property, except if their skin color is darker than mine, except if blah, 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 right? So this is the way the world has been operating, where not only do we have to open our homes open wide, we have to open our hearts and our minds open wide. And we start with a little glimmer of some truth, but there's always room for us to expand that perception more. And literally in this case, in this point in time, and with this person and the tradition that continued, this was an anti-woman statement, an anti-woman perspective that was taken for granted. We'll continue next time. Okay? Sei gesund.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.